Hello, everyone. Welcome to Aaron Shack Politics. We're going to check out Bernie Sanders at his press conference ahead of the vote to block offensive arms sales to Israel. I think it was important to just listen to this press conference and see what Bernie's saying, and maybe we can learn a little something from it. So yeah, let's go from there. Let's react.
This morning to discuss the three joint resolutions of disapproval, or JRDs, that the Senate will be voting on tomorrow. They are SJ Res 111 to block 120 millimeter tank rounds, SJ Res 113 to block 120 millimeter high explosive mortar rounds, SJ Res 115 to block JDAMs, which are guidance kits attached to many of the bombs dropped in Gaza. The truth of the matter is,
let's just note that the guidance bombs just allow them to hit civilians more accurately. That's what's going on here.
that from a legal perspective, these resolutions are not complicated. They're cut and dry. The United States government is currently in violation of the law, and every member of the U.S. Senate who believes in the rule of law should vote for these resolutions. The Foreign Assistance Act and the Arms Export Control Act are very clear.
Yep.
The United States cannot provide weaponry to countries that violate internationally recognized human rights or block U.S. humanitarian aid.
That's right.
According to the United Nations,
They blocked everybody's
much of the
humanitarian aid.
international community and every humanitarian organization on the ground in Gaza, Israel is clearly in violation of these laws.
Bernie's spitting bars
Under
here.
these circumstances, it is illegal for the U.S. government to provide them with more offensive weaponry. Joint resolutions of disapproval are Congress's tool to enforce those laws.
That's right, and we
As
should.
I have said many times, Israel clearly had a right to respond to the horrific Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7th, which killed some 1,200 innocent people and took 250 hostages. I don't think anybody in the U.S. Senate disagrees with that. But Prime Minister Netanyahu's
But killing
extremist
civilians for a
government
whole year?
has
I don't think
not
so.
simply waged war against Hamas.
Yep,
It has waged all-out war against the Palestinian people.
that's right.
Within Gaza's population of just 2.2 million inhabitants, more than 43,000 have been killed and more than 103,000 injured.
Yep,
60% of whom are women, children, and elderly people.
that's right.
2/3 of all structures in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed.
Yeah,
That includes 87% of the housing.
so what that means is they don't want there to be a place for these people, even if you were to survive. They don't want a place for you to go back to. That's why this is ethnic cleansing and genocide.
87% of the housing, 84% of health facilities, and 70% of water and sanitation plants. Every one of Gaza's 12 universities has been bombed, as have hundreds of.
Because without education, you can't have a society. Without education, you can't have an informed electorate or an informed public. And when you're occupying someone, as you do under apartheid, when you are an occupying force, you do not want the people that you occupy to be informed. Because if they know things, they can battle against you, they can outsmart you, they can do all sorts of things in order to free themselves from your evil grasp and your genocide.
Schools. For 13 months, there has been no electricity in Gaza.
Yep.
And that's what has gone on over the last year. And as horrific as that situation is, what is taking place today, now, as we speak, is even worse. As a result of Israel blocking desperately needed humanitarian aid in recent weeks, the volume of aid getting into Gaza is lower than at any point since the war began. More aid is needed, less aid is getting through.
Mm-hmm.
The result, and let's be very clear about this, the result is that many, many thousands of children are facing malnutrition and starvation.
Yeah, look at that image on the left.
UN reports, quote, the situation unfolding in North Gaza is apocalyptic.
Yep.
The entire population in North Gaza is at imminent risk of dying from disease, famine, and violence, end of quote. And Israel's recent decision to ban UNRWA, the backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza,
the UNRWA,
will only make a horrific situation even worse.
Yep, did on
Clearly,
purpose.
What is happening in Gaza today is unspeakable.
Let's just take this moment to mention that Bernie has been on the right side of history in every single issue that he's been involved in. He has always stood next to the people who can't speak for themselves. He has always stood for them. He has stood next to people that have faced social injustices and racial inequality and all sorts of things. He has always been a hero and a champion. We can't say that about a lot of other politicians. You would think you could say it about Joe Biden, but he has been equivocally wrong on this. Him and Kamala Harris and his administration are opposing Bernie on this, as is Senator Chuck Schumer, the majority whip. Disgraceful.
But what makes it even more painful is that much of what is happening there has been done with U.S. weapons and with American taxpayer support.
Yep.
In the last year...
And, you know, how do we feel about our tax dollars going to bombing innocent men, women, and children? How do we feel about it bombing hospitals and schools, mosques, churches? How do we feel about Israeli snipers sniping innocent children and pregnant women? How do we feel about our tax dollars just being used in that way without our permission? You know? Would we permit that if we had any choice in the matter? We had two presidential candidates that were only for more genocide.
Alone, the U.S. has provided $18 billion in military aid to Israel and delivered more than 50,000 tons of military equipment. In other words, and this is the most important point to be made, the United States of America is complicit in these atrocities. That complicity must end, and that is what these resolutions are about.
Yep.
It is time to tell the Netanyahu government that they cannot use U.S. taxpayer dollars and American weapons in violation of U.S. and international law and in violation of our moral values.
This should be an easy vote, guys. Like, this should be everyone, bipartisan, unilaterally say, oh my God, children are starving, people are dying, innocent people are being hurt. This is a modern day Holocaust. It should be so easy to condemn this, but so many people, Joe Biden included, $11 million, I believe, from AIPAC. Other senators here also getting, you know, large amounts. Not quite 11 million, but, you know, enough to buy their moral values. And I don't know, the way I feel is like if I were burdened with decisions like this, you know, I would think about how I would feel in that situation. I would, you know, I know there's separation of church and state, but I would look to my, you know, what would God want me to do in that situation, right? Like, I would turn to every source. I would turn to the people. I would be flying to Gaza to try to figure out what's going on, or at least go to Israel, you know, just and try to ask people, you know, speak with reporters, speak with these journalists that are reporting from Gaza that are on Twitter. It's free to speak with these people, and I would want to know, like, what can we do? What's actually going on? Like, what's, you know, like, how is this possible? I mean, this should be such an open and shut case that, like, everyone would just be like, yeah, this is wrong. Like, we're on the wrong side of history. So I'm just shocked that everyone's not with Bernie on this one. But when you do have political action committees like AIPAC and others that can literally just buy all of our duly elected senators and congressmen and stuff like that. I guess you can't really be too shocked that money runs the whole system. And at the end of the day, our votes really don't mean much if they're controlled by corporate interests and the fact that Israel is another country. Our country is being controlled by another country. That should disturb everyone in both parties, that Israel has so much power over the United States. And I wouldn't even consider them an ally if they won't even listen to us in situations like this. If we say no, or if the UN says no, it's just shocking.
It is also time to make clear to Netanyahu that he cannot continue to undermine U.S. foreign policy goals. Yep. The U.S. government wants...
And we asked him to do something about it. We gave him a 30-day deadline. And then he just did nothing, basically, and shrugged it off. And then we basically said, yeah, no consequences for your actions. Yeah, you didn't really let as much aid through as we wanted, but you did let a little go through. And then your soldiers burned it and lit it on fire after all the cameramen left. Except they didn't leave because it was on film. So, oopsie.
A ceasefire for hostage deal. Netanyahu has prevented a deal to preserve his coalition. The U.S.
If he cared about the hostages, he would have sent in his own team, or, you know, we would have been like, hey, SEAL Team 6, they're yours. Let's go in, let's get them. But that's not the priority here. Ethnic cleansing is the priority. The hostages are the reason to keep going with the war. It's his incentive to never find the hostages. And that's not a crazy thing to say. And I think it's horrible, because I agree. The hostages should be returned. They should be rescued, whatever. But I also think all Palestinian people should not have to suffer under these conditions, regardless of whatever happened before October 7th, or during October 7th, or after October 7th.
Government wants
I gotta let Bernie talk, man.
Aid to reach desperate people in Gaza. Netanyahu is blocking it. The U.S. government wants to contain regional escalation. Netanyahu has refused diplomatic off-ramps and launched several reckless attacks without consulting the United States. The U.S. government wants to stop settlement expansion and settler violence in the West Bank. Netanyahu and his ministers have driven record settlement expansion and armed extremist settlers. The U.S. government wants a...
Yeah, let's take that back for a second, because settlements have expanded in the West Bank, and they are taking land that doesn't belong to theirs. It's UN international law. All of this stuff outlaws these settlements. It has been classified that these settlements, specifically in Israel, are illegal. They are wrong. Not just morally, not just criminally, not just objectively. Internationally wrong. Everyone agrees on this except for America and Israel and maybe a few other countries, but not enough to be notable. So, and the second half is that the IDF arms these settlers, and, you know, instead of saying like, oh, don't go too crazy, guys, they oftentimes go with them to kill Palestinians, beat them, jail them, what have you. And they come up with bogus reasons, trumped up charges. So Bernie's right on the nose here, and he's not pulling any punches yet. He hasn't used the genocide word. I don't think he will, but this stuff needed to be said. At the very least, this vote gets struck down for sure, because, you know, not everyone's going to be on the squad with this one. But he's 100% right, and it needs to be on the record. Who stood for this genocide and who opposed it? Because we will vote accordingly, and we damn well should.
Plan for
we have any morals.
Netanyahu will not engage. And by the way, blocking these sales would also...
No, because anything post-war, Netanyahu's out of power. His incentive is to keep the war going so he can stay in power indefinitely.
Be in keeping with actions taken by some of our closest allies. The UK suspended 30 arms export licenses after concluding there was an unspeakable risk.
Finally.
They could be
Italy, Ireland,
international law. Germany,
Spain.
Italy, Spain, Canada, Belgium, and the Netherlands have taken similar steps. UN bodies
Germany's
have called for
still. Germany may have taken some steps, but man, like they love Israel, and they won't let you protest in honor of Palestine. For Germany being the home of the Nazi Party, and I get it, they've grown, they've changed. It just feels like they've learned nothing. That now they're so indebted to the Jews for mistakes they made almost 100 years ago, and they now allow the Jews to carry out their own Holocaust, and they co-sign it. So I don't know. I don't know about Germany. I don't think we can give them a pass here.
to the arms shipment fueling
They're
the
pretty
conflict.
pro-genocide.
So let me thank all of you again for being here. Let me hand the mic over to Senator Merkley. Jeff?
All right.
Thank you, Bernie, and guys. I stand before you today as someone who has spent a lifetime advocating for Israel's economic success and for their security in a very difficult
Yeah, you should have
part of
pulled the
world.
mic up.
I was 21 when I
He's a little taller.
went to Israel and hitchhiked throughout the country, stayed at a kibbutz, proceeded to swim in the Dead Sea and the Red Sea and the
Dead
Med
Sea's
Sea,
great
Mediterranean Sea.
in there.
I've been back to Israel a number of times and seen the phenomenal, successful country they have built as a startup nation, as a nation that solved its energy challenges, as a nation that reforested.
Why are you
and
talking about this?
have
dude?
always felt I'd be voting for each effort to assist Israel with security. And I will continue to support defensive weapons for Israel, for David's sling, for a variety of undertakings. And I would gladly support financing of a far more effective barrier that could not be easily penetrated from Gaza into Israel.
Okay.
Giving Israel full time to respond. to
Build
what
the
happened
wall,
on the
make it
horrific day of
huger. I don't know.
October
This
7th.
guy seems a little sus.
But the Netanyahu
But-
government has undertaken policies that are out of sync with American values.
Out of sync with
And that's
anyone's
why I'm
values,
here
dude. Christian,
moment.
God, like
It's President Biden who
No
referred to
one-
it as indiscriminate bombing. That bombing
yeah. Biden
has
doesn't care
produced
though.
massive
As a Catholic, it's disgusting.
massive injuries, massive destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And the largest part of the calamity has been on the innocents, not those who conducted October 7th attack. And we are, as a nation, providing the weapons that are being used in Gaza. Therefore, we are, as citizens, complicit in this strategy that is out of sync with our values and out of sync with our law and out of sync with international law.
Yeah.
Even the report that came under NSM 20, and I really applaud Senator Van Hollen for his leadership on so many things related to the Middle East, but particularly having that national security memorandum created, found that our weapon supplies were inconsistent with obligations under international humanitarian law or with practices to mitigate civilian harm. So it is important, even when we have an ally, even when there is a country that is
Yeah, there's got to be a red line, dude.
that engages
You can't let your
in
friends do
egregious,
stuff like this. And,
devastating practices
Israel's not
that
your
harm
friend.
civilians in such a massive way.
I mean,
that
we're
we stand
arming
up and
them.
say, this
They could turn
is
that
wrong.
on us if
It's
they
wrong
wanted
under
to.
our law. It's wrong under
Wouldn't be a good
international law.
idea, but
It's wrong under moral values to conduct a campaign in this fashion.
yeah.
And that's why I'll be supporting these three resolutions opposing transfer of weapons, offensive weapons to Israel. And I'll turn this over, I think, to Peter Welch.
Thank you very much, Bernie and Chris and Jeff. Thank you. Really appreciate the work you've done on this. You know, there's a question that America has to face, and it is about the role of humanitarian considerations in the conduct of our foreign policy. The argument is being made against injecting what clearly is a concern for the humanitarian catastrophe that is now continuing in Gaza,
Yeah.
as to whether the long-term commitment that the United States has had to Israel as a Jewish and democratic state.
I would say it's leaning very autocratic right now. And the other thing to note is that it's about to start getting cold over there. Seasons are changing. It's not going to get easier in terms of famine. There's no shelter. There's like, look at the picture. Like it's just a crumbled city. Like there's, you can get under what roofs remain and then they'll fall on you, or they'll, bomb it again to make sure they get you that time. I mean, there's just like, there's nowhere safe from the elements or, the Israeli forces,
Can coexist with that. All of us here support Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. All of us here believe in the two-state solution.
Where is
all
it,
of
man?
us believe that the relationship we've had with Israel is special. And all of us here are appalled at what Hamas did to slaughter 1,200 innocent Israelis. And all of us here
but that's
support the
nothing
right
in
of
comparison
Israel to defend itself.
How many innocents Israel has killed?
But what has unfolded in the name
doesn't
of
matter who
defense
started it.
Is
because it didn't all start on October 7th.
43,000 and rising Palestinians, many of whom are women and children.
Also, I mean, it needs to be said, it's not like nice or anything, but why are we just doing this now? Like, was Bernie told to like hold off? Were they like, don't do this, like we gotta let the election play out, or we got other stuff, other priorities, like why are we just now really trying to rally and push back against this? Like, this would have been a great move if the Democratic Party as a whole were doing this before the election. It doesn't really matter now. It's mostly symbolic if Donald Trump's about to take over and, literally undo anything you try to do right here.
Children in non-combatants, not at all connected to Hamas. What has happened is over 100,000 children and innocent bystanders have been severely injured, including amputation. And what's unfolding before our very eyes right now is mass starvation.
I think it's very true. Seeing dozens of images online of children, like newborns, like toddlers, like just barely walking and stuff with no limbs. Like, how are you starting life like that? And what did they do? They didn't do anything. They're just born in Gaza. A crime, And
the spread of disease. Is the United States in its foreign policy, with that commitment we've had to Israel, forced to be blind to the suffering before our very eyes?
Yeah.
Particularly when it's our munitions that are being used? Yeah. Should we be blind to the suffering?
Your Republican colleagues and probably some Democrats are there signing those missiles, which I think is one of the most despicable and disgusting things I've ever seen. I don't care who you're bombing. I don't care if they're the worst, most vile people and enemies of America, and we all agree and we're happy that we're fighting the bad guys or what have you. Signing bombs? Like, this, what happened to morality? What happened to like the religion that we claim to cling to, Christianity, that teaches us all these good values and all these right things to do? How do you summon the courage and the disgusting, just filth of a slime you would have to be to do something like that? I literally don't have words. I don't have nice
those
words in that
Palestinian women
sense.
and children. When top military officials in Israel themselves have said that there's no further military purpose for continued bombing and military activity in Gaza.
Just for fun.
Our view
to
is
use up weapons and
that the humanitarian
make some money
considerations
for
are important. It's consistent with the Leahy Law, and we should enforce it. It's consistent with humanitarian international law, where the power that is occupying or in control has an obligation to facilitate, not impede, the delivery of life-saving aid. So I stand here as a person who believes that there's no inconsistency with the United States asserting conditions on aid that are consistent with our commitment to our own policies, a two-state solution, the enforcement of the Leahy Law, the enforcement of international law. You know, when I think about the conflict that the United States had with Russia for so long, the Soviet Union, there are many historians who think one of the most significant components of what made us so successful was our civil rights movement. The commitment that was on display to the people around the world of our struggle to try to broaden the reach of civil rights for every person. Isn't that the same situation we face, where we have before us every single day evidence of more suffering of women and children in a situation where there's no military purpose to be served by the continuation of using our weapons, and where it's in total conflict with us having any chance of achieving a two-state solution, and where the result of this activity is escalation in Lebanon, escalation even in Syria,
and Iran,
and rising violence in the West Bank,
and West Bank,
and where politicians,
where settlers are
in
armed,
Israel, including Netanyahu and many others who support him, are talking about annexing the West Bank and completely and utterly turning their back on a two-state solution. This is very important for Congress to act. And it's an action that's consistent with the long-term commitment we've had to Israel's security, and it's a commitment that should be a long-term commitment we have to the inclusion of humanitarian considerations in our foreign policy. Thank you.
Senator Ben Holland.
Well, I want to start by thanking Senator Sanders for introducing these joint resolutions of disapproval. I think it's a very important moment for the United States Senate. And what these resolutions stand for is the simple proposition that U.S. taxpayer assistance should not come in the form of a blank check, even to our closest partners. We need assurances that U.S. interests, values, and priorities will be respected by foreign governments that receive American support. That principle should apply universally, including to the Netanyahu government in Israel. But even as the United States has provided billions and billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer-financed bombs and other offensive weapon systems, we've seen Prime Minister Netanyahu repeatedly violate the terms of American security assistance, disregard U.S. priorities, and ignore our requests. A partnership should be a two-way street, not a one-way blank check. Like all of my colleagues,
he's taken everything,
in the aftermath of the horrible
Doesn't care.
Hamas terrorist attacks of October 7th, I have repeatedly.
I don't want to be crass, but Netanyahu has made Biden his bitch, and America, the same thing. We're his bitch. Because we cower and we do whatever he wants, and we send him the money. He says, I need to bomb more children. Yes, sir. Right away. No balls.
Right to
no one has any balls.
And end Hamas's control of Gaza. And I remain steadfast in that support. There must be no more October 7th. But how you conduct that defense matters. A just war must nevertheless be waged justly. And that's why recipients of U.S. weapons must comply with American laws and policies. Recipients of security assistance must,
international
one,
law,
facilitate and not arbitrarily restrict the delivery of humanitarian assistance into war zones where U.S. weapons are being used. And two, American-supplied weapons must be used in accordance with international humanitarian law. The Netanyahu government is violating both of these requirements in Gaza. I would just turn everyone's attention to first the phone call that President Biden had with Prime Minister Netanyahu on October 9th, where he said the situation in Gaza was already bad, and it's getting worse, and as Senator Sanders says, it's getting apocalyptic. That was followed up by a letter from Secretaries Blinken and Austin on October 13th. Their letter was to then Defense Minister Gallant and to Ron
and
Dermer.
Gallant got
I would
fired.
remind people that the Minister of Defense Gallant has since been fired by Netanyahu from the government because he
with a
prioritized
pro-settler Zionist
a return of the hostages and a ceasefire. In fact, I just met with the father of one of the people who's still hostage right now in Gaza, who supports this resolution. In that letter,
ain't nobody supporting Netanyahu right
Secretary
now.
Blinken and Austin
Except crazy Zionist
referenced
Nazis.
U.S. law. They referenced 620I of the Foreign Assistance Act. They referenced NSM 20, the President's National Security Memorandum. And they said this: the humanitarian situation for over 2 million civilians in Gaza is increasingly dire.
Right.
They also said trucks carrying humanitarian commodities, including perishable goods funded by the United States,
in previous
are
videos
delayed
already.
at crossing platforms. We are particularly concerned that recent actions by the Israeli government, including halting commercial imports, denying or impeding nearly 90% of humanitarian movements between northern and southern Gaza in September, and continuing burdensome and excessive dual-use restrictions, among other things they list, are impeding the delivery of absolutely necessary life-saving aid. They then go out in this letter to spell out what needs to happen in order to meet the conditions and standards of U.S. law and policy. I'll just read from the first part. Ahead of winter surge, all forms of assistance throughout Gaza by, number one, enabling a minimum of 350 trucks per day to enter into Gaza. They have a number of other
30
elements, including removing restrictions on the use of container and closed trucks and increasing the number of vetted drivers to 400. They go on to list a number of other criteria. And the reality is, with maybe minimal change, these conditions that Secretary Austin and Secretary Blinken laid out have not been met.
No consequence.
Just ask the folks at UN agencies responsible for monitoring humanitarian aid in Gaza, and ask the humanitarian organizations who are delivering aid in Gaza. Here's what 15 United Nations and humanitarian organizations said on November 1st. They said, and Senator Sanders quoted this, the situation unfolding in North Gaza is apocalyptic. They said rescue teams have been deliberately attacked and thwarted in their attempts to pull people buried under the rubble of their homes. They said the entire Palestinian population in North Gaza is at imminent risk of dying from disease, famine, and violence. They said humanitarian aid cannot keep up with the scale of the needs due to the access constraints. Basic life-saving goods are not available. Humanitarians are not safe to do their work and are blocked by Israeli forces and by insecurity from reaching people in need. They go on from that. They also say member states of the UN, must use their leverage to ensure respect for international law. This includes withholding arms transfers where there is a clear risk that such arms will be used in violation of international law. I would point out that among the people who signed that letter was Cindy McCain. Cindy McCain is the head of the World Food Program. Cindy McCain does not sign letters lightly. She takes her job seriously. I would point out that Kathy Russell, who's the executive director of UNICEF, another American appointee, signed this
And we talked
letter.
about Russell. We talked about
Cindy
UNICEF.
McCain tweeted out on November 8th, quote, "The unacceptable is confirmed, colon, famine is likely happening or imminent in North Gaza. Immediate steps must be taken to allow safe, rapid, and unimpeded flow of humanitarian and commercial supplies to prevent an all-out catastrophe now," in capital letters. I want to reference a Washington Post story on November 13th that came out after the deadline that had been set by Secretaries Austin and Blinken. They said, we need this to be addressed in 30 days. I think all of us believe that they were already in violation. The Netanyahu government was already in violation. But things have clearly gotten even worse since they wrote that letter.
That's right.
And so we would expect there to be some consequences when things get even worse. So the Washington Post stated, and we confirmed this, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has refused to publicly disavow the plan which calls for the military to take control of the north by starving out the civilian population and treating everyone who remains as combatants.
Yep.
It goes on to say the IDF says it has been given no such orders and is focused on dismantling Hamas, but
Sure.
the ongoing military operation in the north appears to have much in common with that strategy, the strategy laid out by one of the Israeli commanders to
Right.
starve people. And the Post goes on to say they conducted their
everyone
own
as a
analysis
combatant.
after interviewing lots of individuals, and they concluded that it was clear, as we can see, that the Netanyahu government was not meeting the requirements set out in the letter sent.
Not
by
even
the
close,
US government.
dude. Not even an
And
effort.
so it is time that we take some actions. I want to just reference two other things. That letter also said, and I would refer to you, I know some of you are aware of this, but that letter also had another comment in it. It's the very last paragraph. This is the letter from Secretaries Austin and Blinken. Lastly, it is vitally important that our governments establish a new channel through which we can raise and discuss civilian harm incidents. Our engagements to date have not produced the necessary outcomes. We ask that the initial virtual meeting of this channel be held by the end of October. I don't know if that's been held, but this is a very consequential
Probably not.
statement because we know from reporting that there are about 500 incidents that are being reviewed by the Department of State where U.S. weapons were used, where there was believed to be unnecessary civilian harm. And it's the obligation of the U.S. government to follow through on those cases and determine whether or not there was a clear violation before sending more bombs and more weapons, and yet that has not been done. I will finally point out, Bernie, that this letter had two other things. One, saying don't pass the legislation. Don't have the Knesset pass the legislation banning UNRWA. Days after this letter went out.
Did anyway.
It also says that the ICRC, as required by international law, needs to have access to prisoners. That still has not happened. So every single one of the elements that was raised in this letter from the United States government has either been blatantly
Let us
violated
have access to
or not
prisoners
met.
if they're jailed improperly
And that's why we
without,
need to use
without
the recourse
cause.
we have to pause U.S. offensive military assistance, including these three JRDs, until the Netanyahu government finally comes into compliance and begins to listen to the priorities of the United States government. So
I don't think
Bernie.
they would even listen, even if you pass that.
Okay, any questions? Ma'am? You're with whom?
Oh, AP, Party you and your colleagues have written numerous letters in the past few months to the Biden administration, to the White House, asking for a number of things, including humanitarian aid, the sanctioning of Israeli officials who are allowing the settler violence in the West Bank. Have you received any response to any of those letters? And second of all, the President Joe Biden has no more elections left to run. He has a few weeks left in his government. Why do you think he has not taken actions on this?
I don't want to speculate on what President Biden has done or will do. That's a question for the White House. To the best of our knowledge, we have not gotten satisfactory answers to any of the letters that have been sent. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Big yikes.
I'm with Reuters. How would you respond to the fact that no resolutions of disapproval have ever passed and survived a veto?
Look, what will happen, and I'm not here to tell you how many votes we will even get. What we're talking about here, and every one of my colleagues have made the point, we're talking about a simple legal issue.
Yep.
We may be old-fashioned, but we kind of think that the United States government should obey the law. That's number one. And number two, from a moral perspective, all of us are appalled that the United States of America is complicit in the starvation and malnutrition of many, many thousands of children and others in Gaza. That's the issue before us.
We are.
Sir?
That blood on everyone's hands, whether we like it or not.
You introduced 6 of these resolutions. 3 are coming up for a vote.
Right.
How did that come about, and why these 3 specifically?
I think these are 3 that I think most members can get their arms around and see as having an immediate impact in destroying the lives of people in Gaza. So they're very specific, and I think that they are, frankly, resolutions that will probably attract the most support. Anybody else want to jump in on those? But that's kind of the answer. Not complicated. Ma'am, in the back.
Yeah, Karen River with the New York Times. So it doesn't appear that you're going to get very much at all GOP support on these resolutions. And there's been a long time for the campaign to try to politicize the Israel issue, make Republicans out to be the more pro-Netanyahu, pro-Israel party, and Democrats the anti-Israel. I'm wondering where you think this kind of fits into all that, if that could be exacerbating this, particularly as somebody who's Jewish American yourself, you know, if there is something that you think is a, given that political environment that this is coming.
I don't want to get into the political implications of that. You know, we just came through an election. People can draw their own conclusions of why there was a decline in young people voting, and Democrats aren't doing particularly well with
Pretty
young people.
obvious.
I really don't want
Yeah.
to get into that. I happen to believe that the American people will not be sympathetic to any member of Congress who is turning his or her eyes on the kind of horrendous suffering that is now taking place in Gaza, and in fact, going out of their way to block humanitarian aid.
That's right.
So
Vote them
that would
out.
be my
Doesn't
response.
matter if they have an R
Sure,
or D
Chris,
next to their name.
And I don't want to get into the politics
It's our
part
values.
either, but your question, you said whether they're more pro-Israel, pro-Netanyahu party. And there's a really important distinction, as you know, between those two things. And my view is that it's not pro-Israel to provide the Netanyahu government with unconditional assistance. And I've heard that from many Israelis. So I just want to make that important distinction. You can be pro-Israel and at the same time strongly oppose the policies of this very right-wing extreme Netanyahu government.
Right.
Okay, 1 or 2 more. Yes.
Kobe Hodgman for the Bill News Service.
From who?
The Bill News.
Medill? Okay.
We've seen reports that Secretary Blinken ignored conclusions from constituent agencies, which found arbitrary denial and blockage of.
I don't think they're going to answer much here.
Told Congress that this was not occurring and it was being allowed in. Has this administration been honest with Congress, and if it has not, should there be accountability?
Well, I think we've discussed that issue. Chris just talked about that. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, we'll listen to the rest of the Q&A, but it's
you don't want to talk about politics and you guys
kind of unlikely here.
But clearly, most of your colleagues in the Senate do not see this the way you do. Why are more Democrats, at least, not joining you on this?
Look, others can comment. I don't want to get into the politics of it because this is such a, poignant and painful humanitarian issue. Other members, you can ask them, they will tell you why they feel the way they do.
Yeah.
But anyone want to add to that?
Let
But
them
I don't wanna
explain
speak
why
for
they don't
others.
want to vote for
All right,
this.
maybe one more. Gentleman back there, yeah.
I think that's the best move.
You
Don't let Bernie try to answer for you.
Letter from the administration to Israel. What can you do to hold the administration accountable for?
Can't hold the administration accountable.
Follow through on its threats.
Chris, do you want to?
Well, I'll be pretty blunt. I think the Biden administration has failed to follow the law and failed to follow its own policies
For a whole year.
Biden the administration, including NSM
And more.
20. And the facts are very clear on this point. And the reason I wanted to mention the letter is because you would think after a letter like this was sent, things would at least get a little better.
Nope.
They've gotten
Things
a
got
lot worse.
Yeah.
So what's the point in sending a letter if you don't mean what you say?
Symbolic.
Okay.
He hit the microphone with all the papers. Oh my God. Yeah, that's insane. Yeah, they had even more pictures of the famine. I have to say, well said, Bernie. It's a shame that these joint resolutions did not pass. I think it's important that the conference be covered and analysis be given. And I want to follow this up with another video where we listen in on the Senate votes to block these offensive arms sales to Israel, because I think Bernie talks some more. I think some other people speak some more. And I think we need to analyze what's said, even if this didn't pan out the way that ethically, morally, and just the one, there's not many political issues where, you know, you can say like, oh, there's one equivocal right way, but this is such a moral issue that's like, there really is one right answer here. Like, usually with other issues, this is like compromise, some back and forth, you know, we both want to get to the solution, but we just have different ideas about how. This is not that. This is a one-way street right here. It's so simple. So we'll analyze that soon. So once again, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you on the next one.